Hi, friends. Welcome to the Igniting Imagination podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Greenwood, and delighted to be joined again by my co host, the Reverend Dr. Amy Butler. Hey, Amy.
Hey, I'm so happy to be here and to continue these amazing conversations.
This has been so much fun, hasn't it?
It
Yeah.
it's been fun and it's been heart filling for me. I'm grateful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a good word. So, Amy has been introducing us this season to incredible spiritual and entrepreneurial leaders who are Invested Faith Fellows. I encourage you to visit the Invested Faith website to hear all about them and to read short excerpts about their ministries. And especially if you want to glimpse hope and light and goodness. Just spend a few minutes reading these inspiring stories. So I'm curious, Amy, how do you find these leaders or do they find you? Tell us a little bit about how that works.
So Invested Faith is coming up on 6 years old. And when I was first trying to flesh out the idea, I kept hearing over and over, there is no pipeline. You're not going to be able to find
Mm,
people like this. So in the invested faith model, we don't have an application because social entrepreneurs don't have time to
mm,
write grant proposals and applications. So we go out and actively find these people in communities where churches want to leave legacies, in networks like the one you're building, and
mm,
in many, many different ways. Um, what we have now found after funding over 70 fellows is that there are more in this pipeline than we could ever fund. And yes, they are now
wow.
coming to us in droves. And it's our board who chooses who our fellows are. And
Mm,
they have hard choices to make because we can only fund a certain number. And
mhm.
there are people all over who are doing this kind of work, which is truly hopeful to me because there is a network there already, and just waiting for the church to join in. Um, the characteristics we're looking for are very clear. There are three. We want someone who's rooted in faith, and that is very vague intentionally because we believe where
Mm,
there is good, there is God, and it is not for us to limit the work of God. Secondly, we want someone who is creating a sustainable business model. We don't think passing the plate is going to work for much longer if it still is at all. So, how are we creating unique revenue streams to fund the work of God in this world? And third, we want people who are challenging unjust systems, who are
okay.
dismantling systems of oppression, even if they're in our own institutions. So, really, really clear about those three things. And there are a lot of people doing this work.
Mhm, mm. Many of our listeners are leaders in a local church or perhaps in a denomination, and I think so many of these leaders really desire to identify and encourage an entrepreneurial spirit. But it's not really in our sort of fabric, if you will. And so, how can do you have some wisdom for them in how they might identify those who are gifted with a kind of entrepreneurial spirit, and how they might particularly encourage or support them on their journey?
Well, the first thing, I mean, I think that local pastors and church leaders are the theologians of the community.
Mm,
So
mhm,
without a theology of newness, we cannot
mm.
think in that way. We become, as Brian McLaren says, we embrace an orthodoxy of nostalgia. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, and I think, it's up to us to say we worship a God who is always creating a new thing. So
Mm,
open your eyes and look around. You will see them everywhere. That has
mm,
been the case with invested faith, and I bet you it's the case in the life of every one of the churches in our country who are just hoping to leave a legacy um, of their witness, of the work that will continue. All around you, there are people doing it. Will you put your resources and your name behind them? That's the question.
yeah. Yeah. It's a good word around paying attention, and it strikes me that something that you said earlier about, um, eh, social entrepreneurs really, they don't have a lot of extra time bandwidth, right? They're going at it, and they're going at it hard, and, one of the things I learned in my pastoral ministry is if I could get a small business owner or 2 into leadership, they brought new eyes
Yes.
because they knew what it was to build, to hustle, to be creative, to to kind of engineer things in new and creative ways, and they tended to have a wider threshold for risk, if you will, and so they were really important voices in our visioning, if you will, and
Oh, I think
um,
that's brilliant, and a great example of that is St. Peter's Church in St. Louis, because once they got the idea, they could
mhm.
see all around them people who were
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
this,
they had eyes to see, right, right,
and
because the
then they
conversation had
become the
changed.
identifiers of this work.
Nice,
It's so
nice.
beautiful. It's so beautiful.
Great, great. So our guest today is Candice Wynn. Amy, will you share a little bit about Candice?
You're going to see when you listen to this conversation with Candace, she's so thoughtful and she's not just leading a movement, she is building a table where Black youth, 18 and under, and children, and then um, what she calls their faith influencers can gather around and talk about what the future of faithful people look like in the Black church. She's the founder and executive director of BOON, which stands for Born Out of Necessity. It's the Black Next Gen Network. And she leads this national effort to reframe Christian discipleship for Black children and youth by equipping faith influencers with the tools that they need to be self reflective, theologically rooted, culturally relevant, and developmentally aligned. Her work
Nice.
is so unique because it sits right at that intersection of theological praxis and Black culture and youth development. And she is expanding the network of people who are influencing the next generation of the Black church. She's amazing.
Ah, yeah, I so enjoyed the conversation. What stood out to you about our conversation with Candice?
You know, I loved hearing from her, and she's a really dynamic part of the Invested Faith Resourced Support Group. She uses the word village a lot.
Mm.
And I find this to be very common among our Invested Faith fellows. We cannot do this work alone. We have to gather together. And what she is creating is a network of people who nurture young Black youth in their faith. And that did not exist before. Um, it's innovative and beautiful.
Yeah. It feels really important that she is paying attention to and even surfacing some of the both the giftedness of Black churches and Black youth and some of the resourcing gaps. And she's working with them to fill in some of those gaps. And I loved her posture of learning along the way. It's not like she's going in and saying, "This is what you need and this is what we're going to do," but rather she's having conversation, she's listening, and she and her team are saying, "Okay, what are the resources that are needed? What are we hearing? And um, how do we walk alongside?" And
I love
it
that
feels really
positioning. I love that positioning of like, where are the gaps? Where are the places that are not being filled? How can
mhm,
we fill them? That's
mhm.
beautiful. That's beautiful. That's Jesus.
Right, walking alongside. All right, let's listen to our conversation with Candace. Hi, Candace. Thank you for joining us today.
It is so good to be here, Lisa and Amy. Thank you all for the invitation. It's always an honor to be invited to do this kind of stuff.
Oh, great. We're looking forward to it. We've really been looking forward to it. So I'm going to jump right in and I'm going to start with um, the name of your organization, which is BOON, an acronym for Born Out of Necessity.
Yes.
So let's start with the origin story. Tell us about the organization and why it was born out of necessity. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that, as with many social enterprises, you know, a huge part of the origin story is intertwined with whoever the founder is,
Sure.
and their experience. And I've spent the past about 20 years of my life working within the area of youth ministry within, the local church. So I spent about 14 or so actually serving within the local church, and then
Mm,
6 years working as a youth ministry coaching consultant. And during that time, the disparities of what just existed for Black churches and for Black children, Black youth, it was always just something that was completely jarring to me. I would go to these conferences and be in these spaces and see lots of people, and none of them look like me.
mm,
I'm not a natural networker. I'm totally okay going into a place and walking out and having met nobody. Professionally, I've never been given the opportunity to be shy. It's one of those in ministry, you've got to have somewhat of an outgoing personality. Um, so me stepping into a lot of these spaces and recognizing, hey, there's not a lot of people that look like me. I don't really feel comfortable engaging in conversation. Some of the resources, maybe good content, but translating into my context was a bit challenging. And the idea was literally birthed through the need at my last job to hire someone. And I was like, it would be really, really cool if there was a place, because I was doing a lot of work to diversify the organization. And I had the idea, I'm like, it would be really cool if there was a place where I could go and just say, "Hey, there's a job opening available. Anyone looking for this job?" So I literally went to Facebook, was like, "Let me just create a Facebook group." And I started creating a Facebook group, but in the process of me typing it, God just kind of continuously arrested my spirit and just kept pulling me back and pulling me back from what I was doing, but yet expanding my mind of the possibility of what it could become. And I just, wait, okay, let's not create this Facebook group. Let's get together with some friends. And the evolution of it has been something that, oh my gosh, it is something that is absolutely divinely inspired, because we initially started out just serving Black churches and faith-based organizations, but the way that we have evolved from just out of the context of the local church to just looking at more so faith development of Black children and youth, and supporting how what we have defined as faith influencers. So we're defining faith influencers as typically anyone who has influence potential in the life of a child or a teenager. And we're looking at the role of the church, because the church is still a great central location. However, discipleship isn't just the responsibility of the church. And when we're talking about what it looks like to live out your faith, you need people who are surrounding you in every day, in any given moment, especially when you're young, when you're trying to just figure out life and identity and purpose and all those different pieces. You need people around you
yeah.
who are helping to kind of usher you and show you what it looks like to live out your faith. So we have evolved to just explore in the area of Black childhood theology, and exploring a discipleship for Black teenagers, and looking at what it looks like to equip the influencers that are around them. And the way that we have evolved, it's one of those. I look back, I'm like, "Man, this is something that's beneficial for me as a parent." It's
Mm,
something that would have been beneficial for me when I was serving in the local church, and just um, looking at how God has used um, my hatred, I'll say, of networking, um, to build a network in a place where people could come together to meet each other. Because the saying is true: it takes a village to raise a child, but sometimes even the village, it needs a village.
yeah. Yeah.
Wow, that is just like so powerful. And I love the way you talk about how God just sort of drags us kicking and screaming to this work that we can't not do.
Yes,
Mhm.
And I resonate with that so deeply and also want to cry right now.
Yes.
yes, that's a whole nother conversation right there. That is, yeah.
Your organization, Candice, sits at the intersection of Black children and youth and Black churches. Can you give us a picture of what the landscape is like in that world now, and why your network is so critical for thriving?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and the question a huge part of the need that necessitated BOON also speaks somewhat to, and even the evolution of the organization speaks somewhat to just the investment that Black churches, have the ability to make within their youth ministries. You find way more predominantly white churches or, other ethnic churches that have the ability financially to invest in the children and youth ministries, than you do within Black churches. And within Black churches, you find most people are volunteer. That we had a some research we put out at the top of this year where we had a survey that we put out at the top of this year where we were exploring, the state of next gen ministry within Black churches and faith-based organizations. And our research found that 75% of our respondents said that, the next gen ministry roles within their churches were more likely to be volunteer than paid staff. And that's not true for many other predominantly white churches. So you find leaders who are serving in these spaces who may also be serving other places, and their capacity is just really, really spent. You have people who may not necessarily be equipped to lead, may not necessarily have theological degrees, biblically trained, or whatever the case might be, but just love young people and just want to show up and support them. And they don't mind that the church is not paying them. Some people do. Right. So all the pastors who are listening, don't 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 get caught up in that they don't mind, because everybody doesn't mind $1. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, but there's some people who don't really mind serving because they just feel called and compelled to lead in that capacity. But a huge part of it is speaking to just the investment that churches are able to make when in that area. There's ability, but then there's also what they're doing. Some churches have the ability to do it, but just don't necessarily make the investment that way. They choose to invest other places. But despite where the investment might be, there's still a need that exists within the churches of having the children and the youth to be discipled in a certain kind of way. So the need that we're meeting is we are choosing to invest in those who disciple children and youth, Black children and youth, in ways that some churches may or may not be able to do. So a huge part of that investment is just helping to equip them and provide them with with discipleship strategies, with ways of exploring theological praxis for Black children and for Black youth, something that doesn't exist, like that lane of Black childhood theology, like I mentioned earlier, is just something that doesn't exist. There's not much concrete data that exists around that area. So we're doing the work to taking the Black culture, and then also children and youth development, theological, the theological studies aspect of it too, and just blending them together to provide people at least a starting place of ways of engaging. Some people don't have the ability to go to conferences, so and connect with other people. So we have Zoom conversations. We just literally open the door and say, whoever wants to come talk about these things, get together and talk. They're free, and those have been really, really beneficial for a lot of people. I talk with some people and they're just like, man, the way that they've been able to just grow and just explore personally. I think it's something that has been, beneficial. But I also speak to this other piece too, is that in order to disciple well, you first have to really know what you're talking about, and
Mm.
you first have to be on a certain journey. So we don't just care about discipleship. We don't just care about discipleship. We care about those doing the discipling.
Mhm.
So what does it look like for you to explore your faith and expand your understanding, and take some serious steps towards investing in your own discipleship? So we're investing in people to make sure that they're able to sit down with a young person or walk along life with a young person and be equipped to show up, and to show up in a way that really provides them the abundant life that Jesus says that we all are offered in John 10:10.
Mm. You've
I,
said
I want to,
go,
sorry.
Amy. Go ahead.
I want to just jump in with a follow-up question because you just like gave us the perfect intro. Can you tell us about somebody who's part of the Boone Network and help us understand a real life story of how your work intersects day-to-day work in an actual church.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Let me think for a second. Um, okay, I'll talk about, there's a church that's up in Maryland. They're up in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, just outside of Washington, DC. It's called High Calling Ministry. So for anyone from High Calling Ministries, shout out to you all. They are great supporters, of BOON and the work that we're doing. And, there's some churches because BOON is just be 2 years old next week. So we're like a baby. But in that 2 years, God has definitely given us the ability to do some absolutely amazing things, to have a great foundation. But at High Calling, we've in some of the things that we put out, we have different people we reach out to when we say, "Hey, test this out in your church," just as a pilot to see how it kind of really works, boots on the ground kind of a thing,
Mhm.
and so um, they have a strong youth ministry there. The discipleship is something within them that I've really just admired for a really long time. The ministry is led by someone I call my cousin. We're not really cousins though, but his name is Ty, and I don't know how long Ty has been over the ministry there, but even just this past weekend, well, this one of the themes that we're exploring right now is the idea of crash out culture. Within young people, the idea of crashing out is really big. Crashing out is kind of one of these things when the pressures of the world or life just become very, very heavy, and there is just like an eruption. Crashing out typically will look like some sort of a destruction, either a self-destruction or a destruction of property, or an extreme retreat inward. So we've been exploring this idea of crashing out and what does it look like to disciple amid crash out culture
Mm,
when young
mm,
people are just exploding or they're really just maybe retreating. And the language has really just taken off amongst many, young people who are within about, I guess, maybe Gen Alpha, older Gen Alpha, and even Gen Z. And so one of the things that we did recently with them is that we had an opportunity to step in and on a Zoom conversation and talk with some of their teenagers, and then just diving in and exploring conversations around crashing out. So what I love about that is our team having the ability to explore these themes and these concepts, but also, the partnership we have with them to sit down with their young people. Um, there was another resource that we put out at the top of this year that was around the idea of gifted, exploring um, spiritual gifts and identity. And we put out like an assessment for a teen assessment for them to take a personality test, like which one of these profiles do you fit best into. And the goal of the assessment was to help whoever is discipling them, their faith influencer, understand them a little bit better and have some practical strategies, actual practical tools that might be beneficial to helping them to maximize their potential and their growth and explore their giftedness in different ways. And so Ty texted me after he met with his teenagers and he took that test. And means the text messages that I got, he just kept screenshotting them and sending them to me. And he's just like, man, the teenagers were like, man, spot on. I mean, spot on. This is me. This is so me. And one
mm.
one young person even said, I'm going to send this to my parents so they can understand me better. And
Wow.
so for me to hear a teenager say that they're going to send something that our team has created to their parents so their parents can understand them better, I was just like, the late nights were worth it.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, it's totally worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've talked about some really important pieces of the work, and that's kind of this gap that you see in Black churches and working with Black children and youth in terms of resources and resourcing, and so you've got human resources, if you will, folks who are willing and care, but really wanting to come around with the theology and the formation piece. And then I'm also hearing you name that those who are in the work of working with young people need also the formation piece, like
Mm.
so that they're cared for and equipped. So I would love to hear you kind of get a little gritty with us and say, like, who's who's your I'm going to use air quotes here. Who's your client? Like who are you who who might call you? And there's no such thing as an ideal client. They're probably all different and all of that. But who's your clientele? Maybe who would call you? And then what is it? What are the kinds of um, services and resources that they might receive from you? I just
Mhm.
want people to hear it.
Yeah. So that's a good question. And a huge part of what we have been trying to understand over the first 2 years is our ultimate quote unquote client will be Black children and teenagers.
Hmm.
However, we don't necessarily go direct to student or direct to child or direct to teen.
Right.
It's
They're
it's
your client.
yeah,
You
it's
have
through
customers who are the
yes,
ones who engage you.
yep.
Okay, I like this. Go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's through whoever the, influencers are in their life, right? And I'm using that word influencer intentionally because we understand that you can be influenced by a lot of different things, right?
Mhm.
So there's adults who influence you, there's peers who influence you. Um, let me break down even adults. There's adults who are in your life every day who influence you, who know your name and you know their name. Then there's their peers who influence you. But then you also have people who are on social media who you watch who influence you, right? So thinking about the many different ways of avenues in which a young person is influenced. So the influencers are the people that we target in order to be able to better equip them to do what it is that they do. So, influencers who are in the lives of Black children and Black youth or Black teenagers. Now, we believe in the concept of the village. You know, the village. We actually next week have a new. We had a podcast called the BOON podcast, but we took that on hiatus because we really felt as we were just understanding what God was pushing us to do in this world. We looked at it as things are evolving. So we spent honestly most of this year on a hiatus rebuilding our podcast. Our pilot drops next week on June 19th. I'm not sure
Oh,
when this is going
congrats.
to air, you know, but our pilot drops for our new podcast drops on June 19th, and our pilot is called The Ville. And we're calling it The Ville intentionally because of the importance of the village, you know, and like I think I said this earlier, the whole concept of it takes a village, but even the village raised a child, but even the village needs a village. And so we're really pushing that village concept and that village mentality.
Mm.
You know, sometimes people think of like, um, who is in my village and I don't have a village. I don't have a ton of people. Your village doesn't need to be super big, you know. And honestly, the smaller it is, the more intimate it has the potential to be, you know. So thinking about who are the people who are in the lives of young people, and a huge part of what it is that we're doing is we're it's God gave me these words that a couple months ago as I've been just exploring this whole concept of, I feel like there's been a somewhat degree of a complacency of the village. So a huge part of what we're doing is upsetting the complacency of the village and holding the village accountable. So by giving the village our podcast, right? So as a resource of hearing some conversations from those who are faith influencers, you know, or even people who are within a village, but then also allowing the village to have access to each other. I have 2 children. One of the greatest blessings that God has given me in raising my children, of course, it's my husband. He's amazing. He's phenomenal. But it it's the other mothers who are parenting at life at the same phases and stages as me. So for those who have children who are around the same ages as my children, they're the ones who I call and I'm like, "Yo, we don't beat kids, right? Because these children are getting on my nerves." Full disclosure, right? The people who you can call and say that to, you know, and I feel like there's a need for a transparency and transparency in a community for adults as you are personally walking alongside other people. So what we give people is we give them community. And then also another aspect of what we're doing is we're advancing scholarship in the area of Black child and teenage discipleship. So again, the research and the resources don't necessarily really exist. So we're just doing the work of advancing scholarship and looking at culture, like I mentioned with the crash out, you know, piece two and the gifted piece two, looking at what's happening within culture and figuring out, okay, what does discipleship look like amid this? You know, and that's a huge part of the work that we are doing. So what people can get from us, you know, is good conversation. They can be connected with other people, and they can also have access to resources that are culturally relevant. And I really hate using the word culturally relevant because I feel like people have taken it and kind of like made like, oh, culturally relevant, and just like put a lot of flowers around it. But no, we are really, a huge part of what we're do is I watch television shows and movies, and I ride around looking at, like, I mean, I'm not like one of those creepy people who just like staring at like teenagers right now, because teenagers is who we're exploring. We'll get the children in a little bit, but I think that there's just, when you have the ability to exegete culture, and you have the ability to really just look at existence and what's happening, and look at the theological and connect it with a theological lens, that's a huge part of the work that we're doing to help people understand existence, understand what's happening, and understand what it looks like to disciple amid all that.
I can jump in, but Amy or oh, she looks a little stuck.
Yes, she does.
Oh, no. Let's wait a minute. The rain.
But it's so good for the earth.
Oh, yeah, it's all good. Not complaining. I can never
But
complain
it's
about rain.
annoying
It's
in
been
times
good.
like this.
Yeah.
I'm
At
so
least,
sorry. I'm
no,
so
it's
sorry.
okay. But every
No
time you get
worries.
frozen, at least you look really cute. It's not like a bad face.
For real.
I'm sorry, Blair. What do we need to do to fix this?
Actually, it was fine. Like, if you have a question you want to jump in with, or Lisa
Actually,
can
it was
go.
fine.
Either
Like,
way.
if you have a question
I
you want to
I
jump
do have a
in
question.
I
with,
thought you
or
might.
Lisa
So
can
Yeah.
go. Either
hop on
way.
in.
Okay, so Candice, like I just hear, we're 2 years old. It is so hard to start something new, to begin something that, as you have said, does not exist. That's the grit of innovation.
Mhm.
You're 2 years old. Boone is 2 years old. Where would you like to see Boone at 10 years old?
Hmm.
My prayer has been, and it's interesting just watching how it's even evolved in 2 years, how God has taken it, and I don't know that I really would've dreamed we would be here, or we would be exploring the things that we were exploring, because it wasn't really, um, part of what I was trying to do. But as we had an opportunity to go, we went on tour last year, a listening tour to 6 different cities, and just hearing from our target audience, and the more we listened and the more that we conceptualized and thought and processed, God just kept making it really, really clear. So I can't say that I would have envisioned even last summer that we will be taking this direction this summer. Um, but my prayer has been, I'm a huge autobiographies person. I love reading autobiographies. I love hearing how people talk about their stories and hearing how different people have been able to just do different things. And one of my favorite, all-time favorite, is Cicely Tyson's. And Cicely Tyson talked about, I mean, she lived up, her autobiography, let me just say this, came out the year before she died. And she died at like 92 or 93. So you have been able to tell a story. But one of the things she talked about, it was a dance theater of Harlem, and she was talking about how they got that off the ground, and she used some language that I had never heard before. And she said, that's how we gave the dance theater of Harlem both root and flight. I had never heard it before, but I looked it up and I'm like, oh, other people have heard this before. I'm just late to the party. Um, but my prayer has been, since I read that in her book, is that God will give us root and flight. So when I think, 10 years down the line, my ministry journey has been a journey of just being obedient to whatever is in front of me, whatever God has given me. I do have lots of big dreams. Dreaming, when I do but my favorite personality test is the Adobe creative type. And the creative type that I have is a dreamer. Ideas do not come hard for me. I am an ideas person. I could come to you with 5 ideas right now. Getting them off the ground and executing them, that's not always me, right? um, but
It's so hard. It's
yeah,
so
it
hard.
is. And so my desire ultimately in this, and this is gonna sound really like churchy and, real holy and Christian, but it's the truth, is just to just be obedient to whatever God puts in front of us. Because as we've exploring this lane and we're discovering what does not exist, as we're discovering what does not exist, God is continuously showing how we can do the work of investing to to make it possible and meet the need. So when I think, 10 years down the road, you know, I really imagine this concept of the village um, coming around young people, and really just doing the work of influencing them positively and discipling them. Um, and we have young people who've been able to experience some of the things that we're doing and are able to live more abundant lives because of that. A huge part of that vision piece for me is about those who are on the other end that I can see right now. Of course, there are some things organizationally that I kind of want to just like blow up and do this and do that. But I think ultimately the desire is for the our ultimate quote unquote clients to be able to walk fully in that abundant life without any sort of baggage that exists um, that's been put in place because of some sort of generational trauma. And I think that there's some aspects of generational trauma that unconsciously live and that are passed down from generation to generation. Um, of course, that's a pie in the sky type dream, but there's some things that we can be more aware of as we disciple young people. And so as faith influencers are becoming more aware of the messages and the things that they're passing down and the things that they believe personally, they're able to disciple more effectively.
So I want to ask another question. I often feel like I'm screaming into the wind when I'm talking to the church, and I want I want to ask you, like, if you could say anything to denominational leaders or bishops or adjudicatory
Yeah.
heads in this moment, like, what would you want them to hear?
I think nobody wants to die without leaving a legacy. And legacy looks different for everybody. Some people are meant to have these legacies that just become national platforms like Dr. King, right? Other people are meant to leave legacies that pave the way and provide space for somebody else. And the
That's tough.
greatest legacy that you can leave is a legacy that paves the way and provides space for somebody else to do something that only they can do. And it's hard when you don't give people space and opportunity. And I think that people want young people in their churches and they want young people to have a seat at the tables, kinda, maybe, I don't know, some places, we sometimes value presence over voice. We had them on the program, but they didn't speak into anything that happened in the program. We got them in the church, but they don't speak into anything that happens in the church, you know? And if there is a way for you to open the door for somebody else, especially young people, because they're the ones who are going to be holding it up. And if we want our faith to live on, we've got to be able to tend to and mentor and give people opportunities earlier. I first felt called to ministry at 9 years old. Story for a whole different day, but we can talk about it later if you want to. But I first felt called to ministry at 9 years old. And I can't say that anyone at the church was really paying attention to me. Now, I feel like I've been able to get to the place where I am now because God is still going to be God, and God's going to make a way. But I just wonder what would have happened if someone would have noticed something at 9 and walked alongside me or give me an opportunity to just speak into different things. So uh, when I think about legacy and the possibility of it, I think we've got to get ourselves out of the way, and we've got to stop expecting ourselves to be the ones who have our names on the certificate and the plaque, and we're the ones who are celebrated at a ceremony, because it's not always about you. It can be about the person who celebrated at that ceremony, and then mentioning your name.
Hmm. Throughout what you've been saying during our time together, I'm noticing this theme of really listening, of really paying attention. You went on a kind of listening journey, 6 cities with your primary constituency, which means you had conversations with young people, and you listened and you're listening and paying attention to the culture and what's happening, and you're holding up that mirror, I think it sounds like, to those who are influencers, if you will, particularly in the church. And that paying attention feels really important. And so I appreciate how you're doing it
Mm.
and how you're helping the church do that.
Mm.
Feels really important. I'm going to lead us to our last question, which I guess actually is a little bit about paying attention too. So we're drawing on the Isaiah passage, Isaiah 43, that says, "Do not consider things of old. Uh, But behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it?" And so just wanting you to reflect on, with your experience and what you're seeing, what is an old thing that we need to not consider anymore? And what is a new thing that you see God doing right now?
This is one of those things that I probably would run through the filter of a few friends before saying it, but since we're here, um,
I love you, Candice. You're awesome.
one of the things that I have really been exploring, and the reality is, honestly, I might disagree with this. After saying it, I might disagree with it when when this podcast goes live. But something that's really just sitting on my heart heavy is, what does it look like to really live out your faith? And how do you, when you talk about faith and you talk about the practice of faith, without using the word God, without using the word Jesus, without quoting a scripture, without saying any churchies, that's what a lived faith is.
Hmm.
When you're able to strip it away of all of the church language that we have adopted, and we're able to talk about what the things that I am doing and the ways that I am responding, that's theological praxis.
Hmm.
And I think within the church, we get so caught up in rituals and in dogma. We get so caught up in memorizing scriptures and making sure they know the proper, you know, stories. And there was two stories of the flood, right? We got to know that, right? You got to know about what the rainbow symbolizes, and all of that. And not to say that those things aren't important, but are they? As long as you understand the true heartbeat of what the story is meant to teach. And I think in different seasons of your life, those messages just sit differently because God reveals different things to you. But at 7 years old, the way that you understand it and the lessons that you get is meant for that season. And if you read it again at 17, the messages that you get is meant for that season. I think it's important to understand with the Bible and some aspects of what it's meant to teach. But I think at the end of the day, if you look at the Bible in its entirety, it's a story of people trying and failing and trying and failing and trying and failing, and God saying, okay, I'm going to send you Jesus to show you how to live. So all of those rules, let's replace that with the relationship. All of those laws, let's replace that with love. And when you really look at relationship and when you look at love, what does it really push you to do? It
Hmm.
doesn't push you to memorize a story. The stories can help you to be able to hold on to certain things. I'm not saying that this memorizing and holding on to scripture isn't beneficial, but there have been times when I have had to call out a scripture because it has been essential in my life. However, I think sometimes when we're trying to teach people about faith, we focus on the wrong things.
Hmm.
And if we can focus on what really matters of how someone lives, and I'm not leaning into, like, being a humanist or anything like that. No, I just think that we sometimes, I find us pushing people away because we're speaking in language that doesn't resonate or they don't understand.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's still something I'm processing, and what does it really look like? So again, I might disagree later, but
Hmm.
I don't know how much I'll disagree.
So I'm hearing you say sort of and so I don't want to put words in your mouth, but as you process, I'm hearing that that sometimes we let the form of our faith, the words we say or the rituals or those things, be the whole of our faith. When you're saying it's the substance underneath, it's God is
Mhm.
love that then shapes our life. And that is where God is at work. And
Mhm.
um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I have so enjoyed hearing about your ministry and most of all, hearing your heart in it and your passion for young people, particularly Black children and youth and the Black church, and really trying to help in this moment where we need it so much, helping the church stand to its full witness. And I so appreciate what you're doing.
And I
Thank
just want to jump in and just say, like, I thank you for speaking the truth
Yeah.
and for helping us hear it in a new way.
Mm, mm,
Your voice is so powerful to me and your presence too. I'm grateful for you.
Thank you for being here. I've spent, again, like I've telling my husband this last night, I've spent, this year, um, I've got a window right here and
mm,
beside my desk, and my neighbors probably think I'm crazy because I just stare out the window, or I
mm,
just sit outside the front porch just staring and thinking and processing and writing. And a huge part of what this year has been for me has been developing understanding, trying to hear and develop understanding. So just thank you all for an opportunity to be here and share some of the things that I'm processing, some of the things that I'm growing to understand, and the many different
mm,
ways that I feel God speaking and moving. So it's a pleasure to be here with you all.
mm. Thank you.